The night the laughter fell silent. It began like one of those quiet nights people never talk about, the kind that changes everything without warning. The city lights were dim, the air carried the smell of rain, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise and power, a girl stood silently, pretending she wasn't afraid. Her name was Hannah. She worked quietly, humbly, always doing more than anyone noticed. She kept her head down, spoke politely, and tried never to disturb anyone. People thought that made her weak. That was their mistake. The Korean Mafia boss loved moments like this, moments where he could laugh at somebody who didn't fight back. The room was filled with gold, smoke, and expensive silence. Men watched as he walked around Hana slowly, like a king walking around something he believed he owned. He tilted her chin with his ringed hand, smiling like he had already won. "You're small," he said softly. "People like you survive by obeying, remember that." Inside, Hana swallowed her fear, not because she was helpless, but because she had learned something powerful over years of surviving. Sometimes silence is safer than shouting. She had seen cruelty, she had seen pride, she had learned that some storms you just stand through quietly until they pass. The mafia boss laughed, and his men echoed him, the kind of laughter that feels sharp, like knives made of sound. And still, Hana stood still. Oh, she didn't insult him. Oh, she didn't fight. Oh, she didn't cry. Oh, she simply looked ahead, calm like she knew something they didn't. People like him hated that. His amusement slowly turned into annoyance. How dare someone not react? How dare someone not break? So he pushed harder, not physically, not violently, but with words that tried to belittle her worth, twist her humility into shame, make her feel like nothing. But something strange happened. The more he mocked her, the quieter the room felt, as if the night itself was waiting. Outside, the wind slowed, shadows thickened, a strange chill crept across the floor like unseen frost. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably, though no one knew why. Hana felt it before anyone else. A presence, a calm, ancient, watching, like the night had eyes. Her heartbeat slowed instead of racing. She didn't know why, but she felt safer, not because someone powerful was arriving, but because something kind was near. The door at the far end of the room opened without a sound. No one touched it. No one announced anything. And yet everyone turned. A man stepped inside, quiet, tall, dark coat brushing the floor like moving shadow. His eyes were not harsh, not cruel. They held depth, grief, patience. Eyes that had lived through centuries. Oh, he didn't rush. Oh, he didn't threaten. He simply walked, each step soft, controlled, respectful. The mafia boss straightened, surprised for just a second before masking it with arrogance. "Oh, you weren't invited," he said. The man didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at Hana first, as if making sure she was breathing, as if checking whether she had been harmed. And in that silent exchange, everything changed. Hana felt it instantly. Not fear, not danger, something else. Recognition, like two quiet souls mating in the middle of a storm. Finally, the man spoke, voice low, steady, almost gentle. "Mocking someone who chooses kindness," he said softly, "usually says more about the one who mocks than the one being mocked." The room tensed. Some men reached for weapons out of instinct, not because he threatened them, but because something about him felt beyond them. The mafia boss smirked, pretending to laugh it off. "And who exactly are you," he asked, "to walk into my house and judge the way I speak?" The stranger's gaze didn't harden. Instead, his eyes softened as if he was tired of seeing the same kind of pride across centuries. "Someone," he replied quietly, "who has seen empires fall because they forgot what respect was." A whisper spread. Someone near the back muttered a single name. Vampire King. Not a myth. Not a story. A ruler who rarely appeared, who walked among the world only when something violated his quiet sense of justice. The Mafia boss laughed again, louder this time, covering his unease. A king, he said mockingly, in my city. But his hands trembled just enough for Hana to notice. The Vampire King didn't boast, he didn't threaten, he didn't lift a finger. He simply stepped a little closer, his voice dropping into something softer than any command. Leave her in peace. The room froze, not because of force, because of certainty. There was something noble in him, not cruel dominance, not ego, but a quiet line that should not be crossed. Hana lowered her eyes, not in fear, but in gratitude she didn't yet understand. For the first time in a long time, someone stood beside kindness instead of power. The Mafia boss exhaled slowly. Part of him wanted to challenge, part of him wanted to test, but somewhere deep inside, an older instinct warned him. Do not mistake gentleness for weakness. The silence stretched. The Vampire King turned his head slightly, looking at Hana again, really seeing her. Not as property, not as something fragile, as someone brave enough to stay kind in a world that rewarded cruelty. He opened his mouth, as if about to say something only meant for her. And then the lights flickered. The air thickened. A sound distant, echoing like a storm rolling underground. The Mafia boss noticed it too. Not fear, but something worse. Someone or something else had also sensed the Vampire King's presence and was moving closer. The Vampire King's expression changed, not into anger, but into a quiet, heavy sadness, as if he had hoped tonight would remain simple. Hana felt her breath catch. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know why the night suddenly felt like fate. All she knew was this. For the first time in her life, she wasn't standing alone. And just as the room dimmed again, just as the wind howled through the cracks quietly, the Vampire King whispered something barely audible, meant only for her. Don't be afraid. Oh, and then the door slammed open behind them. Darkness stepped in, and part one ends there, with everyone frozen, with danger approaching, with kindness quietly preparing to defend, with a question hanging in the air. Who or what came looking for the Vampire King, and what secret did Hana carry that made tonight impossible to ignore? The stranger in the door. The wind rushed through the doorway like it remembered another lifetime. Curtains moved. Flames inside the golden lamps trembled, shrinking as if something unseen had stepped across the threshold. The Mafia boss tried to laugh again, but the sound didn't come out right this time. It sounded thin, forced. His men glanced at one another, unsure whether to move, unsure whether to breathe. Ahana didn't blink. She felt it first, a pressure in the air, not violent, not cruel, just heavy, like a memory returning after years of silence. The Vampire King slowly turned his head. Not afraid, only thoughtful. A tall figure stood in the doorway, wrapped in a dark coat, hair damp from rain. His eyes were tired, gentle, and filled with something that looked strangely like regret. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone who had already lost too much. You came, the Vampire King said quietly. The newcomer smiled softly, almost apologetically. You left without saying goodbye, he replied. Their voices weren't angry, there was no shouting, only history, deep, old, complicated. The Mafia boss frowned, confused. Who is he? No one answered. Because the answer was not simple. Hana watched them both, puzzled. The Vampire King's calm presence had already changed the room, but this new man brought a different feeling, not power, not threat, something like unfinished business. The newcomer finally stepped fully inside. Rainwater dropped quietly from his coat. His eyes shifted to Hana. Not curious, not judging, careful, like he didn't want to scare her. "Oh, you're trembling," he said softly. Oh, she hadn't realized she was. "I'm fine," she whispered, because that is what people like her always say. Oh, his gaze deepened. Oh, you learned to say that too young. The Vampire King's expression tightened, not with anger, but with a protective instinct so strong it felt like the night itself leaned closer. "Don't touch her," he said gently. Oh, the words weren't a threat. They were a boundary. The newcomer nodded, respecting it immediately. "I wouldn't," he replied, "not after everything." The Mafia boss scoffed, trying to take back control of the room. "Enough poetry, this is my territory. If you came here to play riddles and speak like ghosts, remember, power is still mine here." The Vampire King turned his gaze toward him, patient, almost compassionate. "Power," he said softly, "belongs to whoever chooses mercy when it is hardest." Those words landed differently this time. Oh, they weren't lessons. Oh, they were memories. Hana realized something quietly. These men weren't arguing over pride. They were standing inside a story older than any of them had spoken aloud. The newcomer sighed, not dramatically, not theatrically, but like someone who had walked too far for too long. "Oh, she's the resin," he murmured. Everyone looked at Hana. Her heart jumped. "The reason for what?" she whispered. The newcomer looked at the Vampire King first, waiting for permission. The king gave the slightest nod. Only then did he answer. "You carry kindness the same way a lighthouse carries light, quietly, without asking for thanks. People like him," his eyes flicked briefly toward the Mafia boss, "don't understand that kind of strength." Ahana didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever called her strong before. The Mafia boss's jaw tightened. Something in him felt exposed, not beaten, just seen, and being seen was always more dangerous than being defeated. "Stop dressing weakness like wisdom," he muttered. The Vampire King stepped forward, voice low, almost tender. "She endured without hardening her heart. That is not weakness. That is the rarest courage I know." Hana looked at him, confused, emotional, unsure what to do with this sudden respect. Years of being overlooked didn't prepare her for being noticed gently. The newcomer finally spoke again, quieter now. "But courage draws attention, not all of it good." He looked past them toward the city, as if something or someone was still coming. And for the first time since he arrived, the Vampire King's expression shifted into something deeper. A concern. The Mafia boss sensed it, and despite himself, he felt a chill. "What are you both hiding?" he demanded. The Vampire King didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Hana once more, voice almost a whisper. "There is a reason fate brought us here tonight." Her throat tightened. "What reason?" A pause. The newcomer closed his eyes briefly, like the truth itself was a wound. And then he said, "Because the danger in this city is not him." His gaze moved slowly toward the Mafia boss. "It's something that has been searching for you long before we ever arrived." The room fell silent. No one laughed. No one mocked. Even the Mafia boss forgot his pride for a heartbeat. Hana felt the world tilt slightly, not from fear but from realization. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was connected to something bigger than she ever imagined. And before anyone could ask another question, before the Vampire King could explain, a distant echo rolled across the streets outside, deep and haunting, like the city itself had just taken a breath. The Vampire King turned toward the window slowly. His voice softened. It found us, and part two ends there, with truth approaching, with alliances forming quietly. With Hana standing at the edge of a destiny she never asked for, but somehow had always been walking toward, the sound that didn't belong to the night. The echo rolled again, deeper this time, as if the sky itself had hidden a heartbeat. The lamps flickered. The walls seemed to inhale, and every man in the room forgot who he was supposed to be. Mafia guards, boss, power. For a moment, they were simply human. Hana's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. She didn't understand why the sound felt familiar, like something she had heard when she was much younger, standing alone outside in the cold, wishing someone would come back for her. The Vampire King watched the window, still and focused, like a lighthouse refusing to blink. The newcomer stood beside him now, not as an enemy, not even as a rival, but as someone who knew how important silence was at times like this. Finally, the Mafia boss found his voice. What was that? He demanded. The Vampire King didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward Hana again in that same careful way, as if every movement mattered. Do you remember, he asked gently, ever waking in the night with the feeling that something was calling you, but you didn't know from where? Hana hesitated. She didn't like talking about that part of her life. The nights she felt watched, not with danger, but with longing, like the world wanted to protect her but didn't know how. Slowly, she nodded. Yes, ever since I was a child. The newcomer looked at the floor, almost ashamed. Well, we should have found you sooner, he murmured. The Mafia boss's patience finally snapped. Stop speaking in circles, he barked. If something is coming, tell me what it is. The Vampire King turned to him, voice calm, steady, but carrying the quiet gravity of truth. It's ancient. It hunts not for blood, not for money, but for purpose. It looks for hearts that still know compassion because compassion threatens it. The Mafia boss blinked, genuinely confused. Why would kindness threaten anything? The Vampire King gave a small, tired smile. Because kindness breaks chains pride cannot. Hana felt something inside her loosen, like a knot that had been tied for years without her noticing. For the first time, she saw her life differently, not as unimportant, not as invisible, but as quietly necessary. The sound outside grew closer. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't an army. It wasn't thunder. It was a calling, a soft, patient, like a whisper carried by the wind. The newcomer stepped closer to the Vampire King. If it reaches her, it will try to convince her that loneliness was destiny, not circumstance. Once it makes someone believe they were meant to be forgotten, it owns them. Hana swallowed hard, because that part she understood. Too well. What do I do? She asked, her voice barely more than breath. The Vampire King didn't tell her to fight. He didn't tell her to be strong. He simply said, stay honest. Whatever it says, answer with truth, not anger, not fear, just truth. That surprised her. The truth felt small, but the way he said it made it sound like a shield forged out of light. The Mafia boss unexpectedly grew quiet. Something about the Vampire King's confidence pulled the arrogance out of the room. For the first time, he looked at Hana not as someone beneath him, but as someone standing at the center of something sacred. Why her? He whispered, not mocking now, but genuinely asking. The Vampire King took a slow breath. Because every king, every ruler, every creature of power, including me, forgets sometimes what it means to be human. He looked at Hana with something like gratitude. People like her remind the world. Outside, the whisper became clearer, not a voice, not words. A feeling, cold but not icy, dark but not cruel. A emptiness, an emptiness that tried to sound comforting. Hannah felt tears sting her eyes. It sounded like all the time she had sat alone and told herself it didn't matter if no one noticed her. It sounded like that quiet voice inside that said, "No one stays." The mafia boss shifted uneasily, as if even he recognized the danger in believing that. The vampire king stepped closer to Hannah, but he didn't shield her. He stood beside her, equal, steady, respectful. "It will try to speak through memory," he warned softly. "Don't fight it, listen, then answer gently." The window glass cooled, fog forming like a breath from something unseen. Shapes didn't appear, shadows didn't move. But the feeling pressed closer. A whisper slid through the room, not aloud, not heard, only felt. "You were meant to be forgotten." Hannah's heart trembled. She saw childhood, empty birthdays, quiet dinners, nights spent trying not to cry so others could sleep. She felt the lie wrap around those memories, pretending to be truth. Slowly, she exhaled. "Oh no," she whispered. The pressure faltered. "I was overlooked, but I was never worthless. I learned to be gentle, and that is not failure." The whisper recoiled like smoke mating wind. The vampire king closed his eyes briefly, not in relief, but in quiet admiration. The newcomer smiled faintly. Even the mafia boss had no words. The air grew colder again, stubborn, persistent. The whisper pressed one more time, darker, closer. "Then why did no one stay?" Hannah's chest tightened. She felt every abandoned moment rush back, every goodbye, every silence. Her lips trembled. She closed her eyes. "Because they didn't know how to love without hurting," she said softly, "and I refused to become like them." The room warmed. Not fully, but enough. The vampire king looked toward the window. "It's listening now," he said quietly, "but it hasn't left, it never leaves quickly." Outside, the city's lights flickered like tired eyes. Inside, nobody moved. And somewhere unseen, something shifted, reconsidering, circling, waiting. Part 3 ends here. With truth spoken. With darkness unsettled. And with the night realizing that this girl is not as fragile as the world once believed. The lessons the night wanted to take back. The room felt different now, not saved, not safe, just aware. As if the walls themselves had heard Hannah speak and decided to listen more carefully. The men who worked for the mafia boss stood quieter than they ever had in their lives, unsure why their hearts suddenly felt heavier, like something important had just been revealed that had nothing to do with guns or territory. The vampire king didn't move, but something in his expression softened, the way old stone softens when it finally feels sunlight after years of cold. "A truth weakens it," he murmured. The newcomer nodded, folding his hands like someone who had prayed too many nights for things that refused to change. "It hates honesty," he added. "It survives by convincing people their pain is their fault." Hannah let the words sink in slowly. All those nights she blamed herself for being quiet, for being unnoticed, for being left behind. Maybe none of it was because she was wrong. Maybe it was because kindness is easy to forget, and even easier to misunderstand. The mafia boss leaned against the table, his confidence gone, replaced with something strange and unfamiliar on his face. "Reflection. So you're saying," he said carefully, "that whatever is out there feeds on shame." The vampire king glanced at him, surprised not because the question was foolish, but because it came from someone who rarely questioned anything inside himself. "Yes," he replied gently, And on pride, both are chains just carved from different metal. That unsettled the room more than any threat. Hana studied the mafia boss silently. Beneath his expensive watch, rings, and pride, there was a flicker of something human, someone who had also once been small, someone who had been underestimated and decided never to feel that way again, even if it meant hurting others first. The newcomer spoke softly, as if he could see through layers time had hidden. The night doesn't choose favorites, it follows wounds. The mafia boss looked away, jaw tight. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. And somehow, that silence felt like the bravest thing he had ever done. A soft breeze slipped through the broken doorway. Not cold, not threatening, tasting the air like curiosity. The echo outside faded into stillness as if the darkness itself had sat down to listen. Hana felt lighter, not because danger had passed, but because she wasn't pretending anymore. She had voiced pain without shame. And in that small act, she had become larger inside herself. The vampire king turned toward her, his voice quieter than before, almost reverent. When the world breaks someone, he said, the true miracle is when they choose not to break others. She didn't know how to answer. Her eyes burned, but it wasn't sadness. It was release. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel proud. Not proud like the mafia boss, proud like a tree that survived winter. The newcomer stepped slowly toward the window, looking out across the city lights. His shoulders carried the weight of a secret he had not spoken yet. It isn't gone, he said. It's thinking, deciding this place has become interesting to it now. The mafia boss swallowed. Because of her. Because of all of us, the newcomer replied softly. Because tonight power hesitated and compassion spoke. Those words landed deep. In the silence that followed, the vampire king finally turned fully toward Hana. There was something in his eyes now, not mystery, not distance, but gratitude. We owe you, he said gently. She shook her head immediately. I didn't do anything. His voice warmed. You did more than most kings ever manage. You stayed gentle. She looked at him, stunned that something so simple could matter so much. Before anyone could speak again, another sound drifted through the night, faint, metallic, echoing down the alley streets. Not supernatural, not ancient, a human. Cars, doors, rushed footsteps. The mafia boss's instincts snapped back. Police, he breathed. His men tensed. Fear returned, but this time it was ordinary fear, law, authority, consequences. The vampire king looked unfazed. They're not here for me, he said calmly, and not for hers. The newcomer's gaze sharpened. They both turned slowly toward the mafia boss. He froze. Something like shame flickered across his eyes for the first time in years, cracking his armor. Hana watched him quietly, and in that moment she didn't see a villain. She saw someone who had spent his whole life running from a memory he refused to face. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights painted the edges of the walls. The vampire king's voice grew gentle again, almost apologetic. Every night asks something from someone, he said softly. Tonight it asks something from you. The mafia boss took a slow breath. Not angry, not mocking, just scared in the way powerful men only ever let themselves be when the room is dark. And what is that? He asked quietly. The vampire king held his gaze. Choose dignity instead of pride. The room stilled. Outside, car doors slammed. Footsteps approached the building. Time slowed, not in magic, not in mystery, but in real human consequence. And part 4 ends here, with police approaching. with secrets pressing closer, and with a man who has always controlled everything standing at the edge of the one thing he cannot control. Who he decides to be next, what power chooses when someone is watching. The sirens grew louder until they were no longer part of the distant city. They were here, pressing against the walls, flashing through the cracks like restless lightning. Men who once laughed boldly now shifted, unsure whether to run or stay. Fear did not roar tonight, it whispered. The Mafia boss stood still. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about dominance, territory, or reputation. He was thinking about how small the room felt and how small he suddenly felt inside his own life. The Vampire King watched him quietly, not as a judge, but as someone who had stood at many crossroads and remembered exactly how heavy they felt. Dignity, the king said softly, is choosing what you'll live with tomorrow, even if it costs you something tonight. The words sank into the silence like gentle stones dropped into deep water. The mafia boss exhaled through his nose, eyes lowering. He remembered being young, sitting outside a shop, listening to older men laugh at him, promising himself he would become untouchable one day. He had thought power meant never being the one laughed at again. But tonight, looking at Hana, he saw a different kind of power. One that didn't control, didn't humiliate, didn't need fear to stand. It unsettled him. It also freed something inside him. If I stay, he said quietly, they'll take everything. The Vampire King shook his head slightly. Not everything, he replied, only what was never really yours. The newcomer added gently, and what remains will finally belong to you. The mafia boss closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he looked at Hana's. Not like a ruler looking at someone beneath him. Like a man finally seeing the truth. I'm sorry, he said, the words awkward, unfamiliar, heavy. Hana didn't answer with triumph or anger. She simply nodded, kind, calm, respectful, and somehow that made the apology real. Outside, a voice shouted commands. Footsteps neared the door. The mafia boss straightened, not with pride but with acceptance. He gestured for his men to lower their weapons. No fighting, he said quietly. They stared at him, stunned. Boss, I said no. His voice wavered once, then steadied. The Vampire King watched with quiet admiration. Power wasn't being stripped from the man. He was finally putting it down. The police burst in moments later. Orders flew through the air, hands lifted, lights flashed across faces. The mafia boss didn't resist, he didn't argue, he didn't perform. He simply placed his wrists forward, eyes steady, almost relieved. As they led him past Hana, he paused. Take care of that strength, he murmured. The world needs more people like you. She smiled softly, not out of victory, but understanding. When the officers left, the building fell into gentle quiet. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the hum of the city and the echo of choices made. The Vampire King turned toward the window, breathing in the night. The dark presence outside had thinned, curious still, circling somewhere beyond, but weakened, thoughtful. It won't bother you for a long time now, he said. Truth leaves marks it can't erase. Hana felt lighter than she had in years. Not because life magically became perfect, but because something within her had shifted. She was no longer apologizing for being gentle. The newcomer smiled at her, tired but peaceful. That calling you felt, he said, was never danger. It was the world trying to lead you to the people who still remember why kindness matters. Hana lowered her eyes, emotional. Will we meet again? The Vampire King hesitated. Centuries had taught him how fleeting connections could be, yet tonight had carved a place in his memory he knew would not fade. The world is wide, he replied softly, but when compassion needs a witness, I usually find my way. They stepped toward the doorway, ready to disappear back into the quiet streets. The night air carried the soft smell of rain again, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt honest. Before leaving, the Vampire King paused and looked back one last time. Remember, he said gently, true strength is never loud. It simply refuses to become cruel. Then he turned away, coat brushing the ground like fading shadow. The newcomer followed, nodding respectfully at Hana before vanishing into the darkness with him. Hana stood alone in the quiet room, not as a victim, not as someone overlooked, but as someone who had finally seen herself clearly. Outside, life continued, cars, whispers, footsteps. Inside, something sacred remained. A lesson. Sometimes the world laughs at kindness, until the moment kindness stands quietly and everything else learns to listen. Oh, and that is how the night ended. Not with violence, not with victory, but with courage choosing gentleness, and power choosing dignity, and a girl discovering that her quiet heart had always been stronger than anyone realized.